It's a great pleasure this afternoon to have Andy Hayden in here in the studio with us. Nice to see you, Andy.
Is that a question?
It's not a question. I'm just wondering about your emotions today. How's your temperament today?
Never better.
Tell us about your days. You're depicted as a bit of a quintessential Aucklander, I guess. But the amusing part for that, to me, is that you're actually from rural Wanganui.
Yeah. I was a recruit.
Yeah.
And then I went to Palmerston and I ended up in Auckland. They'll borrow anyone like that, though. They're short of, numbers and they want to put a tag on you up here. Happens like that.
Yeah. You ended up with an All Black career, I suppose, that if you broke it down, it was probably in two parts, wasn't it? That early start in '72, when you went off on that UK tour and made your debut in, of all such places as, New York.
Did, indeed. Sort of you're a lot dependent on selectors and the whims of their selections and who they think's playing well, and some of them are pretty average. I think I had 9 All Black coaches, maybe 8
right.
All Black coaches in that time. So none of them could have been very good, could they? Hey, 2-year average each. So, yeah, it was.
What about you looking back, that first part of being an All Black? Do you think you were ready for it, or did you have a bit to learn, or was it the making of you? Probably.
You all have a bit to learn, and it's a process. And if you're not learning, it's time you moved on. But in those early days, I thought it was. I didn't want to be an All Black if that's what it was like. And I talked to a number of others in a similar circumstance who felt the same.
So you could easily have given it away?
Most certainly. It wasn't what I aspired to be when I got in. I definitely aspired to be an All Black, but once I got there and found out what it was like, I didn't really think I enjoyed it. Well, I know I didn't enjoy it, but I didn't care if I wasn't there.
But something really flicked your switch around the second time, around '77, when you got back in and played your first test.
Yes, and we were able to create a new atmosphere, a different atmosphere, and something that was a lot more like the environment that I wanted to be part of. And I think that became very much a player-driven environment. And I see that in the environment that the players are operating in today.
Okay. 78, you're ending up playing Wales, and of course there's a famous or infamous incident where people thought that you dived out of the line-out and the penalty had been awarded for that. Unfortunately, well, it turned out that it was for something completely different. Can you talk me through just what your thoughts were in that final line-out about what we're going to do here? How are we going to win this game?
I should do that, because you're obviously very mixed up about all this.
Please, clarify it.
Roger Crittenden on his deathbed will say that he penalised the guy that I was marking, and not Jeff Wheel up the front of the line-out, because and it was pre-prepared and planned, and we knew what we were going to do because we'd played against Welsh teams a couple of times already on that All Black tour, and they climbed all over me all day. And that's why we came up with the remedy that we did come up with. And it was Murray and his idea, and he said it's something that he remembers Ian Ellison going through with Pine Tree Meads, and having Pine Tree climb all over him so he couldn't jump to get the ball. And in those days you needed to jump a little bit. You weren't lifted. And when he couldn't get off the ground because Pine Tree was draped all over him, they came up with a solution, instead of whacking Pine Tree, which wasn't a good idea, that he would dive out of the line-out. And we talked about this, and we talked about it as a remedy because of the amount of obstruction we were getting, particularly in Wales, on that tour. and the discussion was held on the practice ground, and adjacent was a second ground where the dirt trackers were training. And when that practice was taking place, and just in the lead up to the test, there was an injury to Mark Donaldson. And while we waited for Dave Loveridge to come from the practice ground, we sat and talked about that circumstance. And rugby is a lot about remembering what you've learnt. And the learning that I'd had that day came to my mind with a few minutes to go, a day or two later, when we got near the line, and we'd had that obstruction all the way through the day. And there was an injury to Doug Bruce out at First 58. I walked over to where Murray was, leaning over Doug Bruce and looking at the injury, and said to him, "I'm going to dive."
Okay.
3 words. And he went like that. And we went back to the line out. The hooker was ready to throw the ball in, and Quittenden was down my side of the line out. He walked around the back, if you go and have a look at the film, and walked around the back and down the other side and stationed himself at the front of the line out in the other corner. And there was no way he could see me because he couldn't see through on the angle that he was looking. So when the time came, I had to make it quite audible and a little bit more expensive than it would otherwise be, and we were only going to get one chance to get a penalty. And the penalty wasn't for that, it was for all the other lineouts that they'd obstructed me all the way through that game.
You felt justified.
I felt absolutely justified.
Right.
And the other thing I felt is that you don't go back to your dressing shed seat and say, what more could I have done to win the game? Don't be a mug. If you think of it, do it. End of story.
Worked. But you had to rely on Colt kicking the goal.
And yes, well, that's a story in itself.
Isn't it?
But if you've got me in here to feel sorry about that, or to feel apologetic or anything like that,
no, I've got you in here to tell us the real version of what
that
happened,
ain't going to happen,
which is great.
So kick the goal. We went back for the Welsh centenary 2 years later in 1980, and we had 3 guys who rated themselves as goal kickers, and we went back to the same spot where Colt kicked the goal from. One was Nicky Allen, he got 1 out of 3. One was Doug Rollison, he got 1 out of 3. He got none out of 3, and the other was it Clive Clary or Brett Wilson, one of those two, and they got none out. They got 1 out of 9 between the 3 of them, and there was no crowd there then, and there was no pressure on, and there was no one chance at doing this. There was no one charging and getting another kick or anything like that. One chance.
Yeah, great goal from McKechnie. You were involved in in a tempestuous series a few years later against the Box here in '81. Was that one of the more dramatic, if you like, test series that you were involved in?
Certainly, yeah. It was the off the field activity that was going on around was extraordinary. Of course, the flower bomb business and all the rest of it, demonstrations, barbed wire, and troops of police and batons and all that sort of stuff.